How you doing, guys? Dr. Nathan Thompson here with the Wellness Way Yorkville. Happy Monday evening. Hope you guys had a great weekend. We're going to talk about an interesting subject tonight, that being why there is no such thing as a thyroid problem. Oh, let everybody chime in regards to that. In fact, I'm going to show you a funny comment in regards to that. But when I make a bold statement like that, obviously, I'm going to add a little bit of context to it. So let's talk about the thyroid tonight. And I'm going to talk about the different things, the different factors that you have to consider when the doctor comes to you and says you have some kind of thyroid issue that's going on. So if you are watching right now, make sure that you say hello. Let me know also where you're watching from. I know that we're streaming right now to YouTube, to Facebook at Dr. Nathan Thompson, Facebook to Exemplify Health Center, the Wellness Way Yorkville, and also Instagram. So if you're watching on Instagram, make sure that you say hello and let me know also where you are watching from. I sincerely enjoy seeing where people are from. So let's talk a little bit about why there truly is no such thing as a thyroid issue. But while we get into that and wait for people to join online, let's talk about a couple of things. Our last inflammation event, if you're from the Chicagoland area, our last inflammation event is going to be Tuesday, December 5th, 6 o'clock p.m. right here at Exemplify Health Center, Wellness Way, Yorkville. And so if you're from the Chicagoland area, guys, I had actually a phone consult with someone who has been in this journey to try to get her health back for years, and has gone to integrative doctors, naturopaths, things like that. And we looked at her labs, and I asked her, I said, well, what are they doing in order to address the immune system? Because what's interesting is she had Epstein-Barr virus. There was a couple of other things that were going on. And I looked at just what was going on with her immune system and some of the symptoms she had going on. I said, hey, do you happen to have mold in your house? She's like, oh my gosh, I do. It's in the basement. We've just kind of been putting it off. And when you start putting two to two together, guys, if you want to have your health restored, you have to first address what's happening with the immune system and what's triggering it before you can even start to address things like heart disease, cancer, hormone issues, infertility, and things like that. Guys, you have to know how to address the immune system. And that's what we do at the Inflammation Talk. And it's why it makes so much sense to so many people. So if you're from the Chicagoland area, make sure you go to the top of the page, Linktree, and then you will see the Eventbrite link where you can register for that in-person event. And then also, if you are from outside of the Chicagoland area, but still within the contiguous 48 states, and you want to work our office, you can go ahead and click on the link at the top of the page to our inflammation webinar. You can watch that on demand right now if you have an hour of your time, or also you can schedule it to watch it tomorrow night, which is going to be a Tuesday. I believe it's 6 or 7. It'll say on there, but also on Saturday morning as well. So really, really important. We see people from all over the contiguous 48 states, which is really cool to be able to do that. However, we do have the most room and availability to be able to see people in person. So get registered for that. I promise you guys, it'll be worth your time. It will change your life. And then also, if you want to work with us, there'll be a link at the end to be able to schedule a call with me. And that way, before I even see you, we can send me your labs beforehand, fill out some things for me, and then we'll meet and I'll let you know the direction that we need to head in regards to that. So it's kind of cool. And then, guys, coming up, we'll make another announcement, a big announcement. I'll probably even dedicate a whole live to this event that we have coming up in December. It's called 5 Minutes of Fire. This is going to be an online event. It's going to be 23 different workouts done at every day. And yes, I know you're going to say, isn't that a lot? We have it scheduled out so that it's not. 5-minute workouts every single day, 23 days leading up to Christmas Eve. And these 5-minute workouts are going to be very short. They're also going to be very intense. And they're designed with movements that you need in everyday life. And so that's going to be starting December 1st. We'll give you more details coming up about how to get involved with it. But then also, one of the things that we're going to do as a contest is we're going to be releasing brand new t-shirts. And in fact, if you follow me on Instagram, I was wearing a couple of them. They're really awesome because I got a couple in person. And you'll see some of the t-shirts in order to qualify for prizes. You'll see Mandate Burpees, the ever famous Mandate Burpee hundreds of those sold a couple of years ago. And if you understand what was happening with the pandemic, you'll understand why and what I did, and also understand why it was such a popular T-shirt. And then we have the popular burpees T-shirt, 1 star, would not recommend. And then the T-shirt that I think a lot of men will get behind, nobody cares, just work harder. All right. So rather than talk about it, do something about it and continue to work harder. Guys, if you look at life is filled with disappointments, and the people who are successful with health, life, relationships, business are just the people who just shut up and just keep working hard. So I know it's kind of I know it can be kind of cruel and kind of brutal, but that's just the reality of life is nobody cares. Just work harder. Okay. So that'll be coming up, and we'll be making an official announcement coming up soon. So make sure, guys, if you are in Comet, I'm in for that event. It's going to be awesome. We'll be releasing a workout every single day, give you a whole schedule, video demos, and things like that to make it really easy for all of you guys. So let's talk about why there is no such thing as a thyroid issue. Okay. Now I put that up. A lot of the reason is to just get people to pay attention and maybe to shock them just a little bit. And boy, you could see the negative comments that people had. Like I've had a thyroid issue for years, and you don't know what you're talking about, and blah blah blah. In fact, if you are watching on YouTube or on Facebook, a woman commented, "What a load of shit! I have had Hashimoto disease for 30 odd years." And I want you guys to think about that for just a second. And I don't blame her for actually saying that, because obviously, if you are talking about Hashimoto's, you're not talking about a thyroid issue. You're talking about an immune system issue. And I'll go over that with you guys in just a second. But maybe the reason why she's continued to suffer so greatly over 30 years is because the doctor who has been in charge of her care has been treating it as a thyroid issue. So I've been dealing with this for 30 years because it's a thyroid issue. Maybe if you looked at it from a different perspective, you wouldn't be suffering over the last 30 years so greatly. So remember this, if you want to solve the problems, if you want to solve your current problems, and the current method that you have been using to solve the problem, if that's not working, we call that insanity, to continue to do the same things over and over again. And so in order to solve your current problems, you can't think in a way that created the problem in the first place. You have to start thinking differently in order to start solving your problems. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So we're going to talk about looking at the thyroid, but in reality, looking at a lot of things from a lot different perspective, which is why we're able to solve the problems that other can't, because we look at things from a different perspective. So let me know, guys, if this sounds really familiar as we get into the meat and potatoes of the actual tonight's live. Does this sound familiar? Okay. Does this sound familiar? Especially if you are someone who has a thyroid issue. If you've been diagnosed with a thyroid issue, usually this is what people can get behind, because they say, wow, you're describing exactly me. Let's say you go to the doctor and you're fatigued, you have low energy, you don't feel well. And the doctor says, well, maybe it's your thyroid. And so they measure one hormone, which is known as TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, and it's normal. And then they come back and say, well, you're fine. And you're like, but doc, why do I still feel awful? Well, we know it's not your thyroid. Or maybe you don't feel very well, and the doctors run one test, which is going to be thyroid stimulating hormone. We see that your thyroid stimulating hormone is bullet high. And then they say, okay, well, here's your solution is you're going to be on Synthroid. Well, how long am I going to be on Synthroid? Well, you're going to be on it for the rest of your life. And so you may say, hallelujah, that's my answer. That is my ticket to feeling better. And then you go on it and you don't feel any better, and you're still having symptoms of hypothyroidism. And so you ask your doctor, why do I still feel awful? But just remember, the only solution is going to be a hormone solution of T4, synthetic T4. Sometimes you get someone who might be a little bit more advanced. They may give you some T3, maybe some T4. But the biggest thing I want you guys to understand is that thyroid stimulating hormone, if they're basing that off of just that one test, thyroid stimulating hormone isn't even a thyroid hormone. It's a brain hormone. It's a pituitary hormone. And so they're basing their need to put you on medications forever based on a hormone that isn't even considered a thyroid hormone. And that's why we need to start looking at things from a different perspective. Okay. Now, let me see if I can because I forgot to edit something. So let me just do this and see if I can pull this back up. There we go. Okay. So if you can see that right here, here is a thyroid test that we did. This was just the other day. So if they're going to be testing your thyroid and you actually use the traditional medical route, you will see that they may just do TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. They may do T4 as well. They may even do T3, but rarely ever they ever going to go beyond that. And so people ask me, well, why don't they test this deeper? Because when the only solution is to go on synthetic hormone, there is no need to actually test deeper. That's the thing. There's no need if the only solution is to be going on some kind of synthetic T4 or Synthroid or things like that. So the question is if you can see the slide, do your labs look like this? And basically what you see is you see 2.5 pages of lab values. And this is what we would consider a standard thyroid test. So you're looking at a CBC, you're looking at a CBC with a differential, you're looking at some blood tests in order to look at things like anemia, B12 folate, you're looking at iron levels, you're looking at ferritin levels as well. You're also looking at DHEA to look at adrenal function, you're looking at cortisol, and then you're also looking at vitamin D, you're even looking at C-reactive protein, and you're also looking at getting into the thyroid, T3, T4, free T3, free T4. You're looking at thyroid peroxidase, autoantibodies, thyroglobulin autoantibodies, also looking at TSH, and you're also looking at like thyroid uptake. I mean, you're looking at a lot of different things. So you will see that when we are truly testing, we're not just testing the thyroid, but we're truly testing all the mechanisms of why you could have hypothyroidism. So that's what's interesting about that is by looking at that, you can start to determine all the different reasons why someone might have a low thyroid, and the doctors can't figure out why that is. So if you look at the factors, guys, that affect your thyroid, the factors that affect your thyroid are these, and this is what I'm going to talk about. It can be a production issue from the thyroid. It can be a conversion issues. And by conversion, I'm talking about T4 into T3, which T3 is the most biologically active form. And you have to know where it's converted at primarily, which is why you may have normal TSH levels, you may have normal T4 levels, but you may have a real big problem with its active form, that being T3. You may have a transportation issue because remember, thyroid hormone just doesn't float around in the blood. It has to be bound to a carrier protein, kind of like a bus. You may have some interference issues that are going on, and it can also be due to stress as well. So there's a lot of different reasons why, and it's a lot more in detail and a lot more intricate than just saying, it's just wearing out, I guess, and let's just go on a bunch of Synthroid. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is probably the times that we see the least, where you see the least, which, hey, is this just a production issue? So if it's just a production issue, meaning does the thyroid have what it needs in order to be able to manufacture hormone? So does it have the raw materials? What are some of the raw materials that the thyroid needs in order to manufacture thyroid hormone? Number one, you need iron. If you're anemic, you're going to have a problem with that. Number two, it needs iodine. In fact, that's what you call T1, T2, T3, T4 is the number of iodides that are attached to tyrosine, which is the amino acid. So yes, you do need iodine. You also need tyrosine, which is an amino acid. And that's why the most abundant form, the most abundant where you're getting tyrosine is actually coming from dairy, if you guys can believe that. It's in a lot of other forms as well. And then you also need zinc. You also need selenium. You also need vitamins E, vitamin B, vitamin C vitamins, and also vitamin D as well. So that's why if you look at our lab testing, why we do in fact test B vitamins, why we do test vitamin D, and we're not necessarily testing for zinc and selenium and things like that, because the reason why is because the number one reason why isn't because you're not getting enough, is probably because you can't absorb it. You're not absorbing it the way that you are supposed to. So people are like, okay, I'm going to fix my thyroid if I dump a bunch of these vitamins and minerals and make sure I'm getting enough tyrosine, and then all my problems are going to be gone. Well, that's usually not the case. But here's a big problem that you always have to consider. The problem number one is this: is even if you said I'm going to dump a bunch of these things inside of my body, a bigger problem, you'll see this more often, is you may not be making enough stomach acid to be able to absorb the minerals and be able to break down your proteins like tyrosine, for example. Um, and so, well, why wouldn't you be able to absorb those things, or why wouldn't you be able to break those down? So if you are low in stomach acid, the number one cause of being low in stomach acid is due to stress. So give me a thumbs up if you are dealing with stress. Okay. And I always will say this: if you look at thyroid issues, who has it more often, men or women? It's always women. But who also stresses out the most? It's women. That's how you're built. But stress negatively affects your hormones, including fertility hormones and thyroid hormones, a lot more than it does a man. So can it be a production issue? The answer is yes. Can it be due to insufficiency of getting the right amounts of nutrients, vitamins, and minerals? The answer is yes. But I'd also say most likely the real reason why is due to stress and not being able to absorb those things inside the body. Now, here's another problem that you might have too. You could have no stress, and you could have all of the iron and iodine, selenium, zinc, tyrosine. You could have all of those different things, and yet you still won't see production go up. And one of the reasons why you won't see production go up is because you might have Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Well, what is that? Basically, what that is that's an autoimmune response to the thyroid. Now, a lot of times people will say, "Gosh, the immune system just all of a sudden messes up." And I say, you know what? We get people a lot farther when it comes to autoimmunity than just throwing steroids or just throwing synthetic hormones. And the reason why is because we ask this one question: the body is not programmed to attack itself. The immune system is not designed to attack itself. So maybe instead that thyroid, maybe it has been damaged. Maybe it's induced a lot of oxidative damage, which is why selenium is so important. But maybe also, maybe it's infected. Maybe it's infected with things like Epstein-Barr virus, which that is a common area of infection, is in the thyroid gland, mainly because the thyroid is such a vascular organ. So this is why getting the right testing is so critical, because even if you look at thyroid testing, you could actually have normal thyroid levels, and you can still have an autoantibody response to either thyroid peroxidase, which is an enzyme in the thyroid cell, or thyroglobulin antibodies, which is one of the carrier proteins within the cell. And basically, what it means, if you have autoantibodies and you're seeing it in the blood, well, those tissues and the constituents within the cell, they don't belong in the blood. And if they're in the blood, it means there's been some kind of thyroid destruction or damage taking place. And so you might have actually active Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and it may be destroying your thyroid, but you haven't gotten to the point where it's destroyed it so much that you're seeing a huge decrease in thyroid function, which kind of makes you wonder, guys, in regards to type 1 diabetes too. Because all of a sudden they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I caught type 1 diabetes." I'm like, maybe it was going on for years before you finally couldn't make enough insulin to be able to get sugar into the cell. And so that's why I think it's even important to be testing these things even prior to you having any kind of symptoms, because you can start to slow down the reason why it's happening, to be able to preserve your thyroid and not have to go on a thyroid replacement for the rest of your life. So here's a question when it comes to production. So I want to make sure that you guys pay attention to this, because I'm going to give you some tips that you could do in order to possibly help with production. Now, we don't know if you do have a production issue, but you also need to supply the body the raw materials. You can't make something from nothing. So you have to have the raw materials. So here's a question. Number one, do you consume 6 ounces of organ meat per week? Do you consume 6 ounces of organ meat per week? Well, why is organ meat important? Because organ meat contains things like selenium and zinc, and it has one of the highest amounts of iron, specifically liver will have a high amount of iron, but you know what else has a high amount of iron? Spleen. So do you consume 6 ounces of organ meat? So usually liver is the most common. Do you eat at least 1 teaspoon of unrefined sea salt every single day, which will, coming from the sea, which will contain iodine? Do you eat 2 to 3 servings of fish per week, which is also can give you sources of iodine as well? Have you had thyroid autoantibodies, or do you have any other autoimmune diseases? Because I will say this, very rarely do people have one autoimmune disease. So if you have had, something going on with rheumatoid or arthritis or lupus or scleroderma, you better check for thyroid autoantibodies, because thyroid autoantibodies are a lot more common than lupus or scleroderma or rheumatoid arthritis. In fact, I believe the top two is Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and then Sjogren's disease, which is an autoimmune response to the salivary glands, the parotid gland, to the tear ducts, which is why you have dry eyes and you have a dry mouth as well. But here's another thing too: is have you ever had a diagnosis of Epstein-Barr virus, mold, or Lyme? Because that is an immune system issue, and you will see this quite a bit when people do have Epstein-Barr virus. That is one of the main reasons why someone would have Hashimoto's thyroiditis. It's a chronic viral infection that's going on. And guys, you don't catch these things. They only happen, or they only emerge once you have gotten it the first time. But then they will reemerge because they stay in your body forever. They'll reemerge when you're under high amounts of stress. And so whatever causes an increased stress response will cause the body to have a lower immune response, which then you will have a emergence of a viral infection that's actually already there. So ask yourself those questions when you are talking about production. Number two, it's got to be a conversion. So in order for your tissues to use thyroid hormone, it needs to be converted into T4 and then into T3, which is basically removing an iodine, and then which is why they call it T4, and then into T3. So there's enzymes in peripheral tissues that remove an iodine. And so where are these peripheral tissues actually located? So this is the big thing. Where the body converts these things are going to be in the liver. Where they're also going to be located is within the gastrointestinal system, in the kidneys, also within skeletal muscle cells. So this is why you have to have a healthy liver. This is why you can't have a fatty liver. This is also why you can't have gastrointestinal inflammation. This is also why you need a healthy amount of skeletal muscle mass. And in fact, you have probably seen this, is that some people will exercise their way into hypothyroidism. Isn't that interesting? They can exercise their way into Hashimoto's, or they can exercise their way into poor conversion, because if they are over exercising, especially doing a lot of cardio and not doing anything in regards to muscle mass, well, then you're losing the tissue, part of the tissue that is responsible for conversion from T4 into its most active form, being T3. So if you look at this X-ray right here, this is why, guys, X-ray can be so important, is because if you look at an X-ray and you look into the gastrointestinal system, anytime that you see black and you're seeing an abundance of bowel gas, that means that there's an inflammatory response. You guys ever had bloating? Oh, I get bloated when I eat. That means there's something happening in the gastrointestinal system. That might be low stomach acid. That might be some kind of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, in which you're getting fermentation in the small intestine versus in the large intestine, and the intestines swell, which is why you feel bloated. You may have incomplete protein breakdown in the stomach, which then can cause things like leaky gut, in which you're having an immune response at the gastrointestinal barrier. And so if you look at this X-ray, you can see all of the gastrointestinal issues that person. So even sometimes when someone has been already diagnosed with the thyroid issue, I'm like, okay, great. Based on what you just told me, go ahead and get a food test, get a stool test. They're saying, but it's my thyroid. And I said, I understand, but let's go deeper and let's start getting to the reason why this is happening. So here's the question when it comes to your ability to be able to convert these the hormones into its active form. So ask yourself this: do you have, number one, bloating or weight gain after eating? That's a sign that there is a problem. Do you have constipation and or diarrhea, or does it go back and forth? That's an issue that you're having a problem with the gastrointestinal system, which is a large converter. Do you have your gallbladder out? If you have your gallbladder out, that again is not a gallbladder problem. That's a liver problem in which the gallbladder was screaming. So if you've had a gallbladder issue, you have a liver issue, and that is a converter of T4 into T3. Have you had menstrual cycle issues and fertility issues? And if that's the case, that is an issue with the liver, which is also helping with blood sugar control, with hormone metabolism, fat metabolism, but also thyroid hormone conversion. And have you ever had a fatty liver or any kind of blood sugar issues? And guys, this is what's so amazing is that, we have kids who are already having issues with fatty liver. In fact, they have estimated that in the United States, 2/3 of Americans have some level of fatty liver, which is incredible. So the very thing that's responsible for thyroid hormone conversion and blood sugar control, detoxification, hormone metabolism, it's already getting inflamed and it's already getting damaged. So how many doctors are even talking about this other than saying, wait until you have a fire and we'll put you on a synthetic hormone, we'll put you on a statin, put you on a blood pressure medication, put you on an antidepressant, put you on all of these different drugs without an exit strategy. And meanwhile, you say, Doc, what do I need to do in order to prevent the fire? And you know what their answer is? Diet and exercise. Okay, so tell me exactly how to do it. And they'll never give you a plan because the mantra is diet and exercise, diet and exercise. But it almost seems this. It almost seems like they are setting you up to fail so that finally you need to be on the medication for how long? For the rest of your life, which is why we need so many more doctors who actually know about nutrition, who even know about exercise, who know how to lower stress, who knows where it's coming from, who understands physiology more than just saying diet and exercise, because there's a time and a place of knowing when to tell the patient to do it. And there's a time and a place as far as nutrition on when to do certain things and when not to. But the advice that you get, and give me a thumbs up if you agree with me, the advice that you get is so generic and so bland, and there's no kind of accountability. There's no direction that you're supposed to head, which is almost as if you were just set up to absolutely fail and be on that medication for the rest of your life. So it can be production, it can be conversion, and it can also be a transport issue. And just like I said before, your hormones cannot dissolve in the blood. They have to be bound to a protein carrier. So that's why you don't have, that's why most of your hormone is bound up by proteins. Which is why if you've ever done some blood work and they look at albumin, for example, and that's looking at globulin, I should say, globulin, and that's looking at part of that globulin is some protein that's in the blood, and the globulins are a lot of the protein carriers of your hormones. So this can be a transportation issue, which means maybe your thyroid is not having any kind of problem with the production. Maybe it's not having a problem with conversion, but maybe, just maybe, it can't transport those things around. It's almost like if you were building widgets and you had the raw material to build your widget, you had the factory that could build the widget, but you didn't have enough trucks in order to get the widget, to the stores. Well, now then you would say, I have a transport issue. We need more trucks, or we need our trucks not to be broken down. So this is why a transport issue, and no one ever will think of this as well, but this is why a transport issue is absolutely something that you have to consider as well. So when you say, well, what do you mean, Dr. Nate, about a transport issue? Well, with some of these hormones bound to a protein, especially with the thyroid, they can actually be bound instead of to thyroid hormone. They can be bound to estrogens instead. So this is why, yes, even being estrogen dominant can cause you to have a thyroid issue. And so if you look at the whole idea of estrogen dominance, it's not always I'm making too much estrogen. It's I can't clear my estrogens, or I can clear them, or they're getting reabsorbed in the large intestine due to certain problems in the bowels. Or maybe I actually have too low of progesterone, and the number one cause is because of some kind of massive stressor. And so that's usually the issue. It's not that the body is messing up and producing too much estradiol. That would be just crazy to think that. And so if you look at this up here and you see in this woman, in this individual, you can see she had a thyroid problem. But when we did a Dutch test, dried urine total comprehensive hormone, you can see the absolutely incredibly sky high uh, levels of estrogens within her body. It makes you have to ask the question, why is there such a high amount of estrogens in this person's body? So think of then, can she clear it out through her liver? Think about maybe she's got a large amount of body fat, because body fat actually does produce estradiol. But maybe she's also reabsorbing those estrogens after the liver tries to clear it out and squirt it through the gallbladder to in through the intestines, and then it gets actually reabsorbed. So when you do have high amounts of estrogens, those estrogens can bind to thyroid globulin, or thyroid binding hormone, binding globulin, and it can then fill up the buses so that you don't have the transport of thyroid hormone to the tissues. So that's why you have to even consider transportation. So this is where I want you to think of it. So you have to ask yourself this question: if it's a transportation issue, have you had in the past, or do you currently have endometriosis? Because this can be an inflammatory and estrogen metabolizing issue. So I had a woman who came in, and this wasn't long ago. I met with her last week, just as a follow up, and she's been riddled with endometriosis pain for about 10 years. After she had her second child, literally every single month it was like barbed wire across her uterus. And fast forward about 2 months later, she's like, Dr. Nate, like the pain is about 90% better. And so what she really had is she had a problem with estrogen metabolism. So have you had endometriosis, or do you currently have endometriosis? So this is one of your first clues. Do you currently have hot flashes? Do you also have too much body fat? So carrying too much body fat, can that cause an issue with the thyroid? The answer is yes. And this is what gets me is, this whole body positivity movement of just saying, just be you and enjoy your body. And it doesn't matter. There's some devastating effects of carrying too much body fat, guys, just like there's some devastating effects of not carrying enough body fat. So, what we really need to just call it is, we just need to call what we should be focused on is not what we look like, but what will allow us to be able to function best. And so that's why you can't have, ladies, too low a body fat. And that's why you also can't carry too much body fat too, because of what it does to not only be able to make estradiol, but then on top of that, of what it does to the liver and inflames the liver and causes fatty liver and decreases the body's ability to be able to metabolize those estrogens. But here's another thing too, is have you or do you currently take an estrogen-based birth control? Interesting, right? Because if you were taking some kind of estrogen base, which contains a mix of estrogen and then also of progesterone, that will devastate the thyroid. It will devastate the thyroid. So that's why you have to look at all of those different things and those different factors to see it could be a transportation issue. So production, conversion, transportation, but then here's another one: interference. So you may have an issue with interference. Well, what do I mean by interference? Well, what I want you to do is go to high school chemistry or get out your books or go online and look at the periodic table of elements. And I'm going to give you a perfect example of this. And so for some of you, I just probably gave you a heart attack trying to go back to high school chemistry. Um, but if you look at the periodic table of elements, I want you to notice where on earth is iodine in this table of elements. And if you look at the periodic table of elements, they put them into columns. And the reason why they put them into columns because they are chemically similar with the number of electrons on the outside of their of where the electrons are spinning. I know it gets a little bit overwhelming, but they put them where they're similar. So that's why if you go down the line on the first one, you see hydrogen, lithium, sodium, potassium, things like that, you'll see that they're very similar. But if you look at where iodine is on the periodic table of elements and look at the row at which they're in, look at what is next to it or right in the same row. It would be bromine, chlorine, and fluorine, in which they're very similar chemically, which means they're also going to be very biologically similar in your body. Okay. So I want you to think of this. This is why, guys, if you say, oh, I use non-fluoridated toothpaste, this would be one of the reasons why. Also because fluoride is also extremely toxic to the bone marrow as well. But ask yourself this, do I use fluoridated toothpaste? How about this? Antidepressants have fluoride in them as well. So do antibiotics, antacids, and also nonstick cookware, perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOAs. This is why they said, get rid of them. Get rid of the Teflon nonstick cookware because they're destroying thyroids, especially when you heated it and it started to wear off and end up in your food. So number 2, look at your chlorine, drinking water, and swimming pools. Do you use non-chlorinated water as well? This can also be true with swimming pools. And I think where you would have a lot of issues is not necessarily when you're in an outdoor pool as much as indoor swimming. So you will notice if you go into an indoor swimming pool, you'll notice that it smells a lot like chlorine, and repeatedly breathing in that chlorine gas can cause some issues. And then you also have bromine, in which you might have brominated flour. You may have brominated vegetable oil that's in citrus flavored soft drinks, can also be in medications, and it was also in flame retardants as well. So here's what's really interesting, guys, because people are like, oh, you're just full of it. It doesn't matter. It does matter. And in fact, a lot of people will argue, well, it's in just such small amounts. And I'm like, okay, so go ahead and take a little bit of fluorine, a little bit of bromine, go ahead and take a little bit of chlorine, and just continue to have exposure after exposure. And occasionally, then what's going to happen eventually, your bucket's going to fill up. It's going to fill up at some point. And that's why they say, oh, the toxicity is in the dose. And I'm like, but what humans and people, particularly in the United States, are exposed to is small amounts from multiple different factors that are coming in all at once. And there's only so much that the body can handle. And I love it when people say that, oh, well, your liver and your kidneys, they detox for free. Actually, your liver is what detoxes, and the kidney actually removes it partly. But when they say it does it for free, and I'm like, okay, yeah, it does it for free until there's actually too much that the liver can handle, which then at that point, you probably should be feeding it specific amino acids and things in order to stimulate and feed the liver enzymes so that I can keep up with the amount of toxicity exposure that you are getting. So in a normal environment, in a well-nourished person, then yeah, the liver is designed to detox. But if you live here in the United States and you look at the average amount of person on 4 to 5 different medications, chlorinated water, fluoridated toothpaste, brominated vegetable oil coming from foods, and then, I mean, you look at it, our livers are under assault and no one ever pays attention to it. So the FDA is actually paying attention to it. And I rarely ever agree with the FDA. I'm probably on their hit list. But the FDA, this was just recently, this was a week ago, the FDA proposes a ban on brominated vegetable oils in foods. Isn't that interesting? So here's what they said. The FDA has proposed to revoke a regulation authorizing the use of brominated vegetable oil in food, the agency announced in a press release. According to the FDA, Brominated vegetable oil, or BVO, is a vegetable oil modified with bromine and was originally authorized in small amounts by the agency to keep citrus flavoring from separating and floating to the top in some beverages. Okay. And so that's why the some of these companies, and if you even go back 10 or 15 years and you look at Mountain Dew, for example, it absolutely contained brominated vegetable oil. You actually will see that some of the food industry has started to remove it. Maybe they caught on a long time ago. They didn't want to be liable for destroying people's thyroids. But if you look at what the FDA and the research article that the FDA looked at to finally say, hey, you know what, we should just ban this forever, is because of this study that they did. It's called Toxicological Evaluation of Brominated Vegetable Oil in Sprague-Dawley Rats. Oh, they just did it in rats. Well, you know what? They also tested the COVID-19 booster this year on 8 rats. Okay, so there you go. So you'll see that one of the things that they found was that giving rats brominated vegetable oil caused problems with their thyroids, even in small amounts. And now with what I just went over with you, now you understand why, because bromine can get taken into the cell instead of iodine, because it's very chemically similar, and bromine replaces the iodine. And you will not have thyroid hormone if bromine is getting attached, within the tyrosine within the cell instead of iodine. So just remember, guys, it's an interference issue. So it's something that's different than a conversion issue, or different from a production issue or a transportation issue. We would call that an interference issue. And that can be due to toxicity. Here's another one as well. If you have currently, or maybe you have had in the past, any kind of silver filling. You know what's interesting about silver fillings? I was saying this to somebody the other day, is I grew up with a lot of silver fillings, okay? And I won't say why I had a lot of silver fillings, but let's just say I didn't take care of my teeth the way that I was supposed to growing up. But I had a lot of silver fillings. And I remember they would be putting silver in, and I was like, well, what about those new white ones? What's with those white ones? Those composites or whatever. And I remember back in the day, they would say, well, those composites aren't as strong, and the ones that are 50% elemental mercury, they'll last longer, and don't worry, they're stable. But what's interesting now is anytime that you go to the dentist, they won't put any of the silver fillings in. They will use the composites. And now they'll say, well, why do you use the composites instead of the silver fillings? And they'll say, well, just because it's just a better look. I mean, you don't want silver, smile and see silver in your mouth. You see white. And so they're a lot less noticeable. But you're going to notice that the dental industry has quietly moved from silver fillings into the white composites. But here's an awesome article. We got this from PubMed. This is from 2013. And they say thyroid hormones in relation to lead, mercury, and cadmium exposure in the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. And basically what they said is that, yes, exposures to heavy metals can absolutely destroy thyroid tissue. And in fact, where metals like to go is into thyroid, kidney, and fat cells and neurological tissue. And so that's why you cannot have any exposure to those things, especially lead and especially mercury. But where you get a lot of cadmium is actually from painted toys that are coming from China, interesting enough. So here's the question about interference. Do you use, or have you used, fluoridated toothpaste, brominated vegetable oils? Have you ever used nonstick cookware in the past? Do you have, or have you had any mercury fillings? Oh, I've had mercury fillings, but I got them out. Did you get them out correctly? There's a right way to do it. Or are you currently on antidepressants, or have you been on a lot of rounds of antibiotics? Because chances are there's going to be a lot of fluorine in those things as well. Remember, fluorine will make a person very docile. Okay. And here's the last thing too, is that it can also be due to stress. Maybe the reason why you have a problem with thyroid hormone production, maybe the body purposely doing that as a response to stress. Ask yourself this question: does the body mess up? See, if you look at it that the body doesn't mess up, but it's always adapting to the stressors that you're placing in front of it, and it's trying to help you live longer, and it's built for survival, then you will look at everything from a different perspective. Even when you look at x-rays. See, I've had people in which you corrected a curve in their neck and their thyroid went back to normal. Imagine that. And you're like, what kind of witchcraft would that be? And the reason why is because if you have a loss of curve in the neck, stretches the spinal cord, because the brainstem is tethered at the where the skull exits, or where the brainstem exits the skull. It's tethered at the skull, and it's also tethered at T12 in the mid lower part of your back. And anytime, guys, you have a loss of curve, it will pull on the spinal cord because it's attached from the top and the bottom, and it will tether it. And anytime that you're tethering or stretching the spinal cord because of a loss of curves from the side, then essentially what you are doing is you are tethering and stretching and damaging the extension of the brain. And let me ask you a question. How do you think the brain responds when it gets stretched? It goes into a stress state. So that's why having proper curves is so important. And that's why when we're working with people one-on-one and we see that, we're like, it's physical, it's mental, and chemical. Start to correct the physical stressors, because there's never one thing, guys, that makes a person sick. Is rarely ever one thing, and it's usually a combination of all of those. But then how about mental stress as well? Because if you do in fact have mental stress, that mental stress can tell the body is I am in, especially when you're talking about chronic mental stress, it will tell the body I am in a sick state. And what I need to do is I need to down regulate everything. That's why chronic stress will absolutely exhaust a person. That's why chronic stress will cause hormone depletion. That's why chronic stress is so devastating. And so think of how the body then reacts to having a chronic stress or even chronic illness. The thyroid begins to down regulate. So you may even see the thyroid be low, clear across the board. And you may actually say, wow, maybe I'm sick. And I'm going to give you a perfect example, because this right here, this comes from a woman who was a type 2 diabetic, was exhausted, had absolutely no energy. And this is a Dutch test. And if you actually see her cortisol and you see how low her cortisol is, what's interesting is you're like, well, she probably has adrenal fatigue. No, 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 no. The adrenal glands aren't getting fatigued. They're down regulating. And remember this, the thyroid and the adrenals are working hand in hand. So if you see how low her adrenals were functioning, when we actually measured not only within the urine, but then measured in the blood, you can see a huge, huge reduction in cortisol in the morning when it should be at its highest. And so what's interesting is when we tested some things in this person and no one could figure out what was going on. But then when we looked at something known as reverse T3, which you look at T4 and it can be converted into two things. It can be converted into T3, which is the active form, but it can also be converted into reverse T3, which is a mirror image in which the body cannot use. And she had a tremendously high amount of reverse T3. And so you look at this and you're like, why was her body, if she could produce it, why was it shutting it off? And why was it deciding, I want to down regulate your metabolism in a tremendous way? And so you saw such high amounts of reverse T3. And this can be elevated during times of sickness, infection, illness, and under times of extreme mental stress. And you know what this person had? She had cancer. And no one caught it except for me, the chiropractor. It's so funny as I see these comments all the time on saying, you don't know what you're doing because you're just a chiropractor. And I'm like, do you know how many people have come to me that we have saved that other doctors have yet to discover, or they just skipped over? And the reason why is because what they were looking at is they were looking at the screen taking notes and not looking at the person across from them in the eye and truly listening. And so this person ended up having non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And we looked at that and I said, hey, please make sure you go back to your doctor, show them this, and I want you to run some more blood work in order to see. And lo and behold, she ended up having cancer. And the good thing is we're able to catch it soon enough to which now she's doing better. She's doing a lot better than what she was when she had first come into the office. So I want you to think of this when you talk about stress. Have you ever had trauma to the neck? Oh, it was a long time ago. That's the problem. It's an unresolved, unhealed trauma. Things like falls, accidents, sports injuries, car accidents, whiplash, all of those take a toll. Do you sit at a desk all day? Do you have a spouse? Because the number one cause of mental stress in women is their husbands or their significant others. Do you also have kid stress? And are you also getting things that can raise up the stress levels in the body? Are you getting less than 9 hours of sleep per night? See, I just told you a bunch of things that you could do without taking a supplement. And yet the first thing that people will ask is what supplement do I need to take? But what I'm acutely interested in doing is helping you change your lifestyle so that you don't need to be on a bunch of supplements for the rest of your life. Yes, they may help you to get sufficiency. Yes, they may help you. But if your doctor still has you on 19 different supplements 3 years later, then they still haven't addressed the cause, or they still haven't told you how to change your lifestyle, or you have just been unwilling to change your lifestyle. So the question is this, guys, do you want to be manipulated or do you want to be restored? Let me ask you again. Do you want to be manipulated or do you want to be restored? Because every day I get messages for people in which the doctor is just manipulating their physiology without any kind of exit strategy to truly get you restored and back to normal. Do you want to be manipulated or do you want to be restored? And before you answer that question, when you say, I want to be restored, you need to take into account the work that you're going to need to do to truly be restored, because it takes work, it takes diligence, it takes patience, and not a lot of people are willing to do that. But you know who was be able to get restored? My wife was restored. Someone who was devastated with a thyroid issue. Her autoantibodies were at 2,500, severely anemic, unable to get out of bed. And she got to the point where she was able to feel normal, work out, and then also get pregnant again. And had we never done anything and looked at a different way, then she probably still would be sick. She would be in bed. And I definitely wouldn't have our fourth child, Elias Sheldon Thompson, because they just would have kept manipulating her and they would have just given her iron. They would have given her probably some autoimmune type medications and steroids, and they would have just kept upping the dose of Synthroid over and over again. And she still would have never, ever been restored. There's a difference between the two. If you want to continue to be manipulated, then go the medical route. If you want to be restored, then you find a wellness way doctor and you start working with them and you listen to them. And when they say jump, you ask them how high. So, guys, coming up, we're going to be doing our inflammation talk in person Tuesday, December 5th. It's our last one of the year. Last one of the year. December 5th is 6 o'clock. So if you're from the Chicagoland area, please make sure you go to the top of the page to the Eventbrite link and register for that. We have spots usually for each one for about 15 people. When they're gone, they're gone. And then coming up too is our webinar that goes for people that are out of the Chicagoland area within the contiguous 48 states. Just so you guys know that, because I don't want you to watch the webinar if I can't promise you that I can see you. And so if people are out of the country, it is very, very hard for us to get the testing and to get what the things that people need in order to do that. And so if you are in the contiguous 48 states, then you can go watch the webinar. You can watch it right now, or you can watch it on Tuesday evening or Saturday morning, our time. And you'll be able to watch that. There's going to be a link to be able to schedule a discovery call with me as well. So hopefully, guys, after I went over all of that, is there really such thing as a thyroid issue? The answer is no. There's not such thing as an issue, as some kind of thyroid problem or thyroid issue. The thyroid is merely responding. And you know what you can also do? You can also take that and talk now about your hormones. Is that there's really no such thing as about then having a hormone issue, because the real issue is what's causing the body to adapt, and that adaptation is the real problem, or the reason why it has to adapt. That's the real problem, and that's why nobody is getting well when it comes to today's healthcare. So there's no such thing, guys, as a thyroid problem. You have to go much deeper than just taking synthetic hormones for the rest of your life. So, guys, if you enjoyed this, make sure that you share this video and make sure you reach out to other people. Tag a person who you think would benefit from listening to this. And as always, you can go back and you can watch the replay on Facebook. You can watch it back on YouTube as well. And next week, we'll come at you with a brand new live, and coming up towards the end of November, we'll talk about our 5 minutes of fire as well. That'll be awesome. And also your opportunity to get involved in the contest. We'll show you how to do that. So if you guys are in it, make sure you let me know. Guys, be well, be blessed.